Man, it has been a brutal month or so for Pi, basically just being down only. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because I do think that we probably could have seen this coming. I'm going to explain why as we go through this video, because I think once we start to point out what we have been seeing recently, it will make a lot of sense as to why Pi has sold off so dramatically. So stay with us. We'll keep on moving through, go through all that. However, I do just want to give kind of some general context on the market, what we're seeing, all of that type of stuff. What we can see here, obviously, a green day on the day at least, and also a green week as well. We can see things pretty green all over, except for Pi, of course. Pi continuing its run to the downside. If we do look at the month, still a red month. However, we are starting to see more and more green bubbles come in here, though Pi being kind of the largest here, down almost 50% in 1 month. So obviously the last month or so has been really quite difficult for Pi. If we do take a look at the Pi chart, we can see exactly this, right? I mean, if we look, we'll zoom out a little bit here so we can kind of get a sense of like a better sense of kind of how it's been long term. But we can see pretty much being down only since we hit that peak back here on the 26th of February, and then just moving down. We saw a little bit of a relief rally here from like the 9th to like the 12th of March. But ever since then, again, just continued selling. Again, little spikes here and there, but nothing really too inspiring to bring on a bull run or another even just like recovery to break this downward trend line that we have been seeing. If we do look, we can see, RSI recently, we did actually see a little bit of a spike in RSI when we saw this little move here. Again, I'll zoom in a little bit closer so we can see the recent price action. But we did see a little bit of jump in RSI here, but ever since then, we've kind of been at or below kind of the midpoint for RSI, dipping into oversold a couple of different times here. We can see actually, it looks like we might potentially be hitting a bottom here. Hard to say for sure, but it looks like we might potentially be getting one. Again, we kind of saw the first oversold, or I guess the most recent oversold hit here, and then the second one hitting here, potentially at what could end up being kind of like the Pico bottom. Again, really, really hard to say for sure. Again, you can't always trust RSI as being like the bottom indicator. We can see here it actually was even more oversold at this point. And we are currently lower than where we were at that point. So, obviously that's something that we need to keep an eye on. But over the past several months, or I guess, what is this, month or so? I guess a little bit less than a month. It's basically just been down only for Pi after a really successful launch. So BTCC does not have kind of all the price history here. So we'll actually move to trading view, and we can see I also have another tool loaded up as well that we'll take a closer look at. Let's actually move this out to daily, so we can check a couple of different things. We'll go back to hourly for tracking support and resistance. What we can see on the daily is, pretty nice move up on launch, and then basically a full sell off ever since. We'll have to kind of see where things level off. If we do go back to the hourly, we can see a little bit here on this support line that I've drawn. But if we go back to the hourly, we can see that this is kind of the last level of support before we're kind of in no man's land. I mean, we don't really have any sort of historical precedent for where Pi could go if it does drop below this 62 cent point, because obviously we do see a little bit of support at this range. So if we do actually end up giving up this level of support, going to be pretty difficult. So, but here we can see, we do have this tool. It's called the support and resistance channel. We can see it, in my opinion, it actually does a pretty decent job at finding them. We can see the closest level of resistance is going to be at kind of this 91 cent range. We can see it has provided levels of support in the past. It's now going to be providing levels of resistance. And then as we can see here, sitting very, very low on this level of resistance here, kind of between like the 76, 77 cent to like the 80 cent range. So, obviously not much wiggle room here. And like I said, not really much further down to go without us kind of being in an unprecedented spot in terms of Pi price action. Now again, on the way up, we have that one here between like the 90 cent range, and then here we've got one at kind of like the $2 to like the $5. And then again, we can see actually a pretty consistent level of support that we've tried and failed to break multiple times back here about a week ago. We can see that's about between 120 and 117. And then we kind of have this further one up here that's between like 142 and 145. Again, providing multiple points of support and resistance in the past. So all of these are pretty strong levels of support and resistance here. Then obviously, we go further up, but we don't really have many of those zones tracked quite yet, just because we've got enough work to do to get back to that level anyway. However, if you do look, it does appear that we might potentially be starting to find that bottom here. On the hourly, we are kind of showing that double bottom coming in. Not a whole bunch of support built up here quite yet, but it does look like we are showing a level of support. So again, we'll have to see how this goes. Again, if we do not see support hold here, it's very likely that we do come back down into this 62-cent range. So that's personally what I would be expecting. Now, I wanted, before we go into the next type of the next information that I have for you, I want to talk a little bit about why we're seeing this happen. And in my opinion, why we're seeing this happen is because what we've seen out of Pi is we've seen essentially people quietly mining for 6 years, just mining consistently, day in, day out, for years and years and years and years and years. And what we just saw recently was the launch of that token, in which obviously, we saw a fair bit of like euphoria and mania and hype around the launch. However, what we also saw was people finally having liquidity for some of the things that they've been mining for up to 6 years, right? I mean, there are several people that I either know firsthand or have heard of secondhand that essentially have 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, a million Pi. You think when Pi is trading at $2 or $3, when we saw that kind of spike in the chart, that's a very sizable amount of money for these people who have been waiting very patiently for 6-7 years to be able to cash out on this. And so what I think we're seeing right now is an opportunity for people to take some profits that they got for free and take some profits, take them off the table, keep their money safe and, kick back. Obviously, maybe some are fully selling out. Maybe some are just selling half. Who knows? It's really hard to say how much profit taking is actually happening. I think it's fair to say that a lot is happening just because we're seeing price basically in free fall. But I think this makes sense, right? And if we would have thought about this kind of 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, a month ago, that seems reasonable, right? That we would expect some level of sell-off, essentially with people having their liquidity unlocked after 5, 6, 7 years. And so that's what I think is really important to note here, is that this sell-off, in my opinion, is not particularly worrying. I don't think it has anything to do with the fundamental strength of the project. I don't think it has anything to do with Pi being a scam or anything like that. I think it's far more simple than that. People have a bunch of money and they want to take some profits and go do stuff with it, right? Go maybe put a down payment on a house, go on a vacation, go buy a car maybe. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that people could be wanting to do with their Pi coins because of the recent liquidity injection that they have gotten. So I think that's, totally fair. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind as we're starting to see price bleed. Generally, there's kind of two different things that happen here. Is when you have kind of a hyped type of TGE like this, yes, there is going to be some hype to get into the project like we saw with that initial run up, but there is also going to be that selling off and the taking of profits. Everybody wants to get as much as they can, but then when people start to get a little bit afraid, they'd rather at least get something for their money rather than nothing, right? And so I think that's kind of a lot of what we're seeing here. I do think over time, this will improve. We will see conditions improve, and with that, we will see price improve. What we can see here on this X post, we can see not many Pi dApps yet. Just wait as more are launching as Pi network expands. I mean, there's a lot of different things coming to the Pi network. A lot of what's been built so far, and a lot of what the price of Pi is trading on right now is purely the social sentiment, right? I mean, Pi has a very, very strong, very dedicated, very large community, which of course is great, but that's not everything in crypto, right? Of course, it needs to do something. Obviously, Pi has not really had the chance to make that happen yet, and that's exactly what's going on right now. So I think a lot of what happens next and what comes next with Pi's price movement is going to be purely on, do they actually have a functioning ecosystem that people want to use, that people find valuable, that can actually onboard real people to do real things. And that to me is kind of the crux of the point here, is we need to see how that materializes. If that goes well, Pi's price will easily recover and some. I'm quite confident of it. If it doesn't, then yeah, I mean, it might just continue to sell off and bleed and bleed and bleed over a long period of time until something else, narratives, hype, speculation, euphoria, some combination of all of that can bring Pi's price back, since fundamentals can. That's ultimately kind of what we're looking at from my opinion and the way that I'm looking at that. However, I did also want to talk a little bit about something else that we're seeing coming out of the Pi network too, is the math, right? I mean, Pi is similar to Bitcoin in the sense of how its like mining algorithm works, right? Recently, we've seen the mining or the amount that you can mine of Pi go down dramatically. So if you see here, if you are mining solo and keep a 3-year 100% lockup, you can mine about 15.9 Pi in a month. If this mining rate is maintained for the whole year, you will earn about 193 Pi. Decent, but you think about what rates people used to get versus what we're seeing now, and then multiply that by the price. This is like $150 per year. Not nothing, right? But definitely not what we've seen in the past. And so I think that's what's important to kind of emphasize here is just like the Times of Pi network is saying here, as the number of pioneers increases, mining will become even more difficult. This makes Pi even more rare, particularly holding a large stack of it. This is exactly what happened with Bitcoin, right? I mean, we saw the Bitcoin pizza guy spend 10,000 Bitcoin. And at that point in time, that probably was hardly anything. I mean, it was the price of a pizza, right? But now 10,000 Bitcoin is an exceedingly outrageous amount of money. And so we could see something similar happen to Pi. Again, I'm not confident that would happen on the same level just because the sheer number of Pi is so much more numerous, but we could see something similar happen. Again, I'm not trying to make the comparison from Pi to Bitcoin. I don't even think they're the same. I think there's a lot of core and key differences there, but I think, kind of the overall thought and theory of kind of looking at things long-term can still apply. I'm not saying that, I think it's insane to insinuate that Pi will flip Bitcoin or anything like that, but essentially the hashing algorithm, the early adopter benefits, all of that type of stuff, or I guess I should say like the mining algorithm, that type of thing, all of that plays into, people's ability to get their hands on more Pi, and it will eventually play into the long-term scarcity-ish, right? Maybe not totally like super scarce, but there is going to be a level of scarcity that I think we will see. Now, with that though, I want to bring up a key counterpoint, because one thing that Bitcoin has is scarcity, right? I mean, right now, like 85 to 90% of all Bitcoins that ever will exist already exist. And so that is part of kind of that scarcity that we have going on. However, if you look at Pi, you can see that that is not at all the case. We can see circulating Pi is about 6.76 billion. I think the number of Pi the number of unlocked or available Pi is like 12 or 13 billion, but the total supply of Pi is 100 billion. So, I mean, a ton of Pi. And this, this kind of whole mining situation, while you may not be getting as many Pi, there still are so many Pi to unlock, which is why it's really important that we keep a number, or keep an eye on this number, as well as keep an eye on this number. Because what we can see right now is while the market cap may only be 5.28 billion, the fully diluted value of this coin is extremely high at 78 billion. I think this would put Pi, and I think the 5th crypto spot, maybe the 6th crypto spot, but very, very high up on the chart if it was fully diluted. So we have to keep that in mind. With only 6% circulating, not at all with the scarcity play quite yet, right? And so even though there might be some people making that Bitcoin scarcity play, we have to always be careful that, that's not exactly how that's going to look, at least right now, just because there's so much more to dilute into the Pi network. And so you always have to keep an eye on that. One other thing I did want to remind you of as well, if you are looking to trade, obviously Pi is tradable on BTCC. I do have that link in the description below, 10% deposit bonus, which is a really great deal, in addition to various trading bonuses, as well as no KYC or VPN required. I also do have links to WEEX and Phemex down there as well. If you are interested in any of those, again, spot trading, leverage trading, Phemex actually does have pilot contracts as well, so you can trade some coins that aren't actually even really large enough to be listed on a centralized exchange. It's kind of like this pseudo DEX through a centralized exchange type of thing. It's really, really interesting, super cool. So a lot of different trading options down there if you are interested. Also, hopefully you did find the information in this video useful. Hopefully it makes sense kind of what I was getting at in terms of yes, scarcity could be a thing one day, but it's not right now. What we're seeing in terms of price doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the project itself. It could just be that people got a fat airdrop, essentially. I know it wasn't an airdrop, but it was an airdrop of money, right? They got a really, really fat liquidity injection, and they might just be taking profits. So to me, this makes perfectly reasonable sense as to why Pi might be selling off so hard. Eventually we will find a bottom. Eventually we will start to come back. But right now we're just in profit taking mode. I think that's completely reasonable. So also, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, just drop those in the comment section below. I do try to read and respond to all of those as well. I've been a little bit more slow recently, but I do get back to everybody who does comment. So if you have anything that you want to leave, feel free to do that. And then also I do have a Discord community as well. That is going to be through the Patreon down in the link in the description below. If you are interested, like I said, very chill. We just kind of talk about various things. Sometimes I'll send updates in there kind of before I make a video, just in case, something crazy happens in the market. Making a video is obviously a lot more time intensive than just dropping a quick post in Discord. So anyway, all those options in the description below if you are interested. Hopefully you did find the information useful, like I said, but thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.